Thank you very much. Well, I suppose when you think about just listening to the last round of contributions, the reoccurring theme, of course, is that building consensus. And I think it would be very presumptuous to suggest that this is, there's a lot of cynics out there. There's a lot of people who'll say, give you the economic argument. They'll tell you, I could nearly cover up the constituencies now. I could tell you 10 of them that I'd say they'd be definitely getting it over the line. They would have a view that getting up early in the morning, dare I say it, and doing a hard day's work and paying your way and paying for your home. What problem have we got? Why are we carrying the burden, people will tell you. So I think there's a lot of potential arguments out there. I wouldn't agree with them, but I can nearly tell you, looking at someone that's a huge interest in politics, I can nearly tell you the constituencies where it'll be. And there'll be extreme right-wing people who will use it for another political agenda, and there'll be different groupings. We know them. They're on the political landscape already, many of them, who will use different arguments, will use this potential referendum to bring about different focus and different arguments in a very politically, in a very cynical way. So I think we need to have our eyes wide awake here in relation to that. And when people talk about defining what's housing, and when I get a bit uncomfortable when people have to explain the most basic of things to people. But just going back to the issue here is building that consensus. And I want to acknowledge, Wayne, Gavin, Colin and indeed Aoife here for your work and other people who's engaged with us, because I think that is, we've come a long way. Traditionally we would have heard people on the streets with megaphones talking about the right to the Constitution, but with nothing more thought out about it but the suggestion, can we tap into the anger and discontentment of the citizen? And that's not necessarily the responsible. It isn't the responsible way to deal with the end of story. So there are different political narratives, there are different political agendas, and I just think we'd be always mindful of that. But that is the reality of it. So we know that, we acknowledge that. How then do we move forward in terms of, because it's back to this empowerment of the citizen, and I don't suggest anyone here would think this, but it would be crazy to suggest suddenly and I know no one's suggesting it here, that this constitutional referendum was somehow going to sort out our rails in, not necessarily next year, but in 3 years' time. It's not going to do that. So we need to be clear all along the time. This is about giving impetus, this is about giving focus on the issue. This is ultimately going to empower the citizens if they agree with it. And I hope they do, and also then empower them to seek to vindicate that right. That's what it has to be. It has to be as simple as that. It's another power in your constitution that you dearly value and hold, and suddenly that's put up in the face of politicians, whoever they may be, whoever the policymakers are, and said this is now our right in our constitution, and you sort of nearly poking at them and say, remember hereby, this is what it's about. I think that in itself is empowering. So my question really is the building the consensus. And I'd remember on the programme for government, page 120 says, under the title Constitutional Reform, not under housing, under constitutional reform, it says, we will hold a referendum on housing. That's all it says. So that's a promise, and that's fair enough, and I believe they will do that. 2, we know that they've at best 3 years, at very best 2.5 years in government left. So we know that if this referendum is to happen, it's going to happen back from that. So that gives us a pretty tight timeline. So it allows us now to get organising ourselves now, not in 6 months' time, now. And there'll be very much different players on the 15th of December. There may be, I'm not suggesting there are, but there may be. So look, in terms of, in a few lines, simple messages for us take-homes, how do you feel we can partner with you? We can partner with you, not lead above you. We can partner with you in terms of building that consensus. You might each give a tight response. We have 3 minutes.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think, that sort of consensus building is going to be vital. I think it can't be won without that. And consensus building amongst organisations such as ourselves, who are, in that sort of NGO, civil society sector, but it's also, groups who are maybe a little bit less organised as well, sort of tenant advocacy groups and housing activists and that sort of thing, who are on the ground, who will need to be brought into that process as well, and who may be slightly even more effective at that sort of messaging than we could be, and obviously groups like this committee play a vital role in that. Even this discussion is playing a vital role in pushing that forward and reminding the Commission, reminding government as well that it isn't something that's going away. It's not going to fall off the agenda. It's there to stay.
I think some of the what you've just raised there, and some of the conversation we've been having around that kitchen table discussion, I think is really what you're talking about, and how do we sort of get inside people's homes and make sure that the arguments we're putting forward are cogent and clear, that when people are discussing it around
If we can sort this, you'll have a Bank Money next weekend. But if you don't sort this, it's going to be difficult to have a Bank Money next weekend.
Sorry. I was going to try and shut him down, but it's in the speaker.
Wouldn't be the first time that happened.
And that's
so
what
you can continue.
Wouldn't be the first time I tried it either. So I think getting in, I think the political system has a huge role to play here, because one of the things that the political system in Ireland is particularly good at is getting out and knocking on people's doors and asking them for their vote. I think there's a level of, in terms of this discussion of the political system getting out, and armed with having had that deliberative process, understanding why they're going out for these things and the importance of it, so that on the doors they can have those real conversations with people. That'll be really important. The other thing I would say is that a number of us are also a member of other advocacy groups like Raise the Roof, who is doing a number of meetings around the country, engaging with people on issues of housing. And the appetite for a conversation, the appetite for action is definitely there on the ground. Yeah. And I think harnessing that into the different modes will be really important.
Colm, do you want to comment on that before I move on to next?
I'm a law professor in London. I'm probably the least qualified person in this room to comment on winning hearts and minds in the doorstep in Dublin or elsewhere. But I would just emphasise the need for a sort of honest and transparent debate. I think it's incredibly important in the context of Irish politics. I think this is necessary, and as I've already said, I think this committee's discussion is a good example of exactly the sort of transparent and honest debate that needs to happen.
Okay,